Hi everyone, this is Cathy Skipper and Florian Birkmayer, MD, and we're from AromaGnosis. Today we wanted to talk about cognitive dissonance, and it's something that for the last 5 years I've been on my own healing journey since arriving in New Mexico. Well, I've been on it all my life basically, but it really intensified in the last 5 years, helped by my husband Florian, who's a holistic psychiatrist, and he kept saying to me, it's in the dissonance, in the cognitive dissonance that the trauma happens. And at first that was quite a difficult concept for me to understand. I didn't really know what the dissonance was, and over time I have really noticed in our own work with myself and with ourselves and with the people we see in consultations and we sit for in plant medicine, that actually it is the cognitive dissonance that we are really trying to bring light to, so that people can see where this dissonance is and therefore carry on their journey of becoming whole. So let's begin by describing what cognitive dissonance really is.
So in a nutshell, cognitive dissonance is when we know something happened but we're being told it didn't happen. So that there's sort of our own internal belief, and then it's being overruled by what other people tell us. And I noticed this first years ago working with women with trauma, where a lot of them would tell me, well, I was molested as a child, and when I told my parents that uncle or a family friend molested me, they said, shut up, that didn't happen. And the thing that still fascinates me is that instead of the person knowing, well, I know what happened, we then say, oh, but you say parent, other authority figure, okay, it takes over. And that's where the dissonance is. I know what happened, but I'm being told it didn't happen. I remember when I was in residency, so 20 years ago, one of my teachers mentioned a study that there's, in trauma therapy, it was shown that in narrative therapies, when you have people with trauma write the story of their trauma and work through it, the more coherent the story of the trauma is, meaning, this happened, then this happened, then this happened, the less the PTSD symptoms. And conversely, we know that often people who've been traumatized, the story isn't linear, it doesn't make sense, because there's, first of all, sort of the impact of the trauma itself, and so some certain scenes may be really vivid, and there's a lot of memory gaps often, and then, of course, the cognitive dissonance will question our own narrative of the story. So there are a number of healing modalities called narrative therapy, where the idea is to, by coming up with a coherent narrative, to decrease the PTSD symptoms. And this made me think that if you look at the oldest stories that we still have, that we remember, the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Book of Job, even old folk songs, a lot of them, and European fairy tales, they're really, I think, attempts to make a story of the trauma. Let's take the story of Hansel and Gretel, about the two kids that get, quote, lost in the woods, and then they go to the gingerbread house of the witch. At the beginning of the story, the parents take them into the woods to abandon them, and that happened in the 15th century. There was a great famine in Europe, there was a mini ice age and lots of crop failures, and it was quite widespread that parents would actually take their children into the forest, abandon them, sell them into slavery. So to me, the story deals with that trauma. So again, I think humans actually evolved storytelling, a coherent narrative, to try and deal with trauma. And even sort of quote unquote superstitions. Oh, we need to make an offering at this shrine so that the volcano doesn't erupt. Well, it's this idea to have a story, because the incoherence of certain things is traumatizing. The cognitive dissonance, incoherence is another word for cognitive dissonance, is to me where the trauma happens.
And this trauma is very widespread, or this cognitive dissonance is very widespread when you're working with ancestral trauma and our bloodlines, because often there's unintegrated trauma that is, for some reason or another, might be due to ethnicity, might be due to something that ancestors did that has become unacceptable as part of the family or myth or story. And so what happens often is that something is either hidden from view or transformed, the story is transformed, and the child grows up in an ambience, in an atmosphere where so-and-so happened. For example, in my own story, I came from on my mother line, a background of a mixed race background. There were different skin tonalities in my relations, and every time I asked, I was told it was because we were Spanish. But, you know, I could see that it wasn't because we were Spanish. This shrouded secrecy, the shroud or the veil, was very thin. And I could see it, but at the same time, I was a little girl being told this, so I believed it. And so a dissonance happened in my development of who I was and in how my lineage situated itself, in the reality of my lineage. And this happens a lot in ancestral trauma. For example, in children of Nazis who were never, what's the word? Prosecuted. I mean, Florian can speak about this better than I can.
Yeah, and that's actually, I want to share about that a little bit, again, because of this perniciousness, the stickiness of the false family myths. You know, I grew up believing that my grandfather was a famous neurologist and he'd show on TV and everybody knew him as this nice doctor. And when the first clues became apparent to me that he actually had quite a Nazi past, and I don't mean to downplay that in any way, but he was really a Nazi of the first hour, it was a real shock to me, but I wanted to understand more and more, and thankfully there are historians who've done the research. But in my own family, when I would bring up the subject, my siblings would change the subject as if I had all of a sudden switched into a language I didn't understand. So this I'm not ready to go there. You know, there's this magnetic pull, or this the phrase we've been using a lot recently is it's like water to the fish. The cognitive dissonance is hidden in plain sight, and yet it's so all-encompassing, like water to the fish, that people just prefer to stay in it. This is the part I don't understand still, but it really, somehow these false family myths and silences are really powerful. That's what I don't understand. And when we do this work, we often disrupt these family systems that are built around these false family myths and these lies and these nice stories. And that's really, I agree with Cathy, the healing is in the truth, and the truth, and they'll quote, the truth will set you free, but first it will really, really hurt. It's really important to have the truth and to heal the cognitive dissonance, and we find resistances at multiple levels. And I think that's where non-left brain, non-cognitive methods like essential oils, like plant spirits and medicines are really powerful, because they bring the truth from our unconscious, from our soul, where we know it's the truth when our programming, our left brain, our family system has said for so long, oh no, here's this nice story. And that's the other thing, even with the cognitive dissonance, part of us knows there's something wrong, like Cathy was saying. We deep inside, we have that sense that's the story, but something doesn't sound right. And that's, again, the false story hasn't completely taken over. Deep inside, we still know there's something wrong with this picture.
So let's get a little bit concrete so we can understand better. In the plant spirit medicine sessions where we sit for people, what we've noticed is that it might be just an opening of light and awareness to this cognitive dissonance, this friction between reality and what people have been told as they grew up, that's all that's needed in a way to bring someone back into a better sense of alignment and self, so that they can move forward with their lives. So, for example, I'll give you a couple of examples. One was a very simple example. We were sitting for a woman who has a lot of experience with plant medicine, with journeying into the feminine, into herself, into, really being a beacon for others. She runs a center for women. She's a midwife. And I noticed that when she came in, she made her intentions and she set up a little altar before we gave her the plant medicine. And one thing I noticed was that her icons that she put on the altar were very Catholic. And she said, yeah, that's the symbolism I use. I don't want to be in any form appropriating other people's symbolism. So that's mine. I'm Irish. And I noticed even in her physicality, the way she wore her clothes, her energy, I wanted to say, do you have a nun in your family? It felt really like over the top Irish, and like there was some even though she said she wasn't religious, this Catholic religion was coming through in her persona. Anyway, with the plant spirit medicine, at one point she just said, wow, my grandmother came and I've realized it was hidden in plain view, but I'm not Irish on my mother line, I'm German. And it happened a lot in America. There were many, I think it was the highest population of Europeans in America at one point were Germans, but because of World War II and the Nazis, and Germans got a bad press, and it was dangerous to be German. So many German people changed their names and took on a different persona. This is quite a simple realization that she had, but it was huge. It's her mother line. It's her sense of belonging. And that's all she needed from the medicine. It was to let go of this persona she'd been carrying in order to tune in each cell of her body to who she really was and where she came from. So that's one just very, very simple example. An example that happened to me recently with plant spirit medicine was a cognitive dissonance that had followed me my whole life. And I remember being a little girl, and I played with this girl called Jane O'Brien, and my parents didn't really approve of her family because they were quite poor. They came from the council estate, but I really liked them. Her mum was an older woman. They had lots of kids, older brothers, and I sometimes even lied. I really wanted a big family. There was a lot of problems in my own, and I'd lie and make up this family like Jane O'Brien's. And anyway, Jane O'Brien came to play, and the next day, Jane O'Brien's mum and Jane O'Brien went to see the headmaster at this primary school I was at, Mr. Jones, a little Welsh guy. And then I was called into his office. I can't remember what he said. I can't remember what was said. All I know is that from that moment on, I was about 8, till to the day I took the plant spirit medicine, which was a few weeks ago, I had never understood what I'd done. I'd racked my brains. I hadn't done anything wrong. She was my friend, but I'd obviously done something wrong. I was called into the office, the headmaster's office. And then with the plant spirit medicine, the dissonance was dispersed. Light was brought onto it, and I realized Jane O'Brien's mum, the way I'd played with Jane O'Brien, Jane O'Brien's mum had felt there was something going on for me in my family, and she had gone to see the headmaster to signal it. And for 50 years, 48 years, I felt that I'd done something wrong. Actually, Mr. Jones didn't do anything, and he, part of the dissonance the awareness that was brought to the dissonance was also, why didn't he do something to help me? So I hope that makes sense, but it, at the same time as it being frightening to realize that I was in danger in my family and somebody had signaled it, it was also the truth. So it has helped me to ground in to the reality. And we need to be in reality. These dissonances are what cause us to be off center, disaligned from ourselves. They don't make sense.
So maybe just to spell out for me in that story, there are multiple layers of cognitive dissonance. There's Jane O'Brien's mother saying something is wrong here, something's going on in her home. And the one dissonance is that when you're called to the headmaster's office, I've done something wrong instead of the headmaster who's supposed to intervene. And again, I think nothing was done because, based the way I hear the story, it's like, oh, that's a good family, nothing could possibly be going on. So another authority figure, the headmaster, perpetuated the cognitive dissonance. The other cognitive dissonance, oh, this is a good family. So there's multiple layers of cognitive dissonance, and I think that's why cognitive dissonance takes a hold, because there's this authority, and we start questioning ourselves, and that's what's so pernicious about it. Instead of knowing I know what's right, it's like, well, I must be crazy, or we blank it out, dissociation and the memory deleting that happens with PTSD.
Just one more example, which I think is a really good one, is that we sat for a woman that we know well, and that has had an enormous amount of trauma in her life and abandonment. So her main issue is abandonment. And in her relationship, she noticed that, her triggers of abandonment are destructive to the relationship, which is a healthy relationship that she's in now. So her intention was that she wanted to work on insights and how to work with the trigger of abandonment. And her father had been taken away when she was 3, and is in prison for life for murder. Her mother had a lot of difficulties and was on the streets and addicted to alcohol and drugs. And she was taken in with her sister to the father's family, by the father's family. And so in the middle of the journey with the plant medicine, at one point I was helping her and I could see she was crying and she was like the little girl was there. And when the journey was over, she said to me, I wasn't abandoned, we abandoned her. And it turns out that what the awareness that was brought to this cognitive dissonance was that she was taken in by her father's family and she was taught to hate her mother, the mother who had all these children and then just abandoned them. But don't forget, the father is a murderer. And in a way, to maintain the family system as being the good family, they took in the children and turned them against the mother, which camouflaged what the real problem was. And the mother, yes, she had problems. Yes, she was on the streets. Yes, she had addiction. Yes, she was from Mexico and disconnected from her roots. But what the person that we sat for realized was that they should have helped her they should have helped the mother and helped her to have some form of relationship with the mother, or at least compassion for the mother. But instead they turned her against. And the image she had was the mother in a cage in the rain outside, and her siblings and all her father's family in the warm, just looking at her like an animal. And by being able to bring the awareness to what actually happened, it was very important for her to say, I wasn't abandoned, we abandoned her. So there was an opening of the heart and a compassion and an ability to see both sides of the story. There is never just one side, and that's part of the problem.
Yes. So one part of cognitive dissonance, I mentioned the authority, but also there's only one story. There's never just one story. So every time you hear just one story, you can assume there's cognitive dissonance underneath there. Should we talk about how we work with cognitive dissonance?
In 2 seconds, I just wanted to say that the cognitive dissonance is happening to us globally as a collective in the world. We are living on the planet that is beautiful, nature is amazing. We're destroying the very thing that enables us to be alive with a system that at the same time we're born into, and we're told that if we don't join into it, we'll die, which is the system that we have at the moment of money, patriarchy, power. This very system that is, we're told, this is the system through education, through media, through society, through the need to integrate, connect, be part of, and survive. This is what we have to be part of. But at the same time, we see that the very system that we're educated into and told that we have to be part of is destroying what enables us to be alive. We are part of nature. So that dissonance in itself is collective and enormous. That is the trauma that each one of us is living on the planet at the moment. And it is a trauma. It's an individual trauma as each one of us tunes into that individually and feels it. And it's a collective trauma. So it's something that I think we really need to be aware of and realign. And, it's happening, but we need to bring more light onto the dissonance of the way society is educating us in the world today.
And similarly, with the issues brought to light, once again, by the Black Lives Matter movement and around the world, there is this, systemic racism and structural racism and inherent privilege are, again, like water to the fish. So many people that are benefiting from it don't see it because we've been brought up that way, like water to the fish. And that's, again, these false single stories, only I'm the one who can fix it. We're seeing this right-wing populism rising everywhere in the world, and it's really like psychological warfare. Again, cognitive dissonance to create trauma, to disempower, I keep thinking of in that horror movie a few years ago, Get Out, they call it the sunken place. That's dissociation, and it happens through that cognitive dissonance. So on all these levels, it's coming. Even with COVID, there's all sorts of gifts in COVID. There's all sorts of, we're in this together. One of the gifts of COVID to me is that when people say, oh, we can't change about the environment, it's going to take till 2050. Well, look how quickly we changed our behaviors related to COVID, and the ongoing environmental changes are much more threatening and much more fatal and destructive than COVID. We can change, but and then instead of that, we're being told, oh no, we can't even trust another person. We have to wear masks, which, masks are good, but we can't. There's a fear virus that's spreading even more than the physical virus. And again, the fear virus is creating a cognitive dissonance of sort of separating people from each other instead of saying we're in this together and we can cause global change very rapidly together. Instead, we're being told, no, you're disempowered, you have to be afraid all the time. Again, cognitive dissonance.
So how to work with cognitive dissonance? In a way, cognitive dissonance and shadow work are one and the same, because what is kept from us is we're in our unconscious. We're aware of it without being aware of it. So it's in the shadow aspect of the self. We work with our clients through consultations, and there we're really looking for that point of cognitive dissonance so that we can help the person bring some light to it and open it up. So that's one of our main focuses, and we do that through shadow work. We use oils. There are special, if you can look through the other videos we've done on labdanum. We might have talked about galbanum, but we definitely have talked about them on our blog. So they're two oils that we use a lot for shadow work, but again, it depends on the situation and the person. And with this plant spirit medicine, we sit for people, and that really, as I've said, seems to be the purpose of that medicine at the moment. The medicine's evolved. When we were young, I remember it was all about the psychedelics, the visuals, and that's not where we're at now. We needed that, after the war, the 60s, and then I was young in the 70s and early 80s. We needed something that was going to, in a way, wake up the parts of ourselves that hadn't yet had space to be. But those places have developed well, and the medicine evolves as we evolve, or as the planet needs it to evolve. So what we've seen is there's not really much in terms of visuals that are going on. What it is, Florian can talk about it a bit more, he calls it a truth serum, but really it's helping to help people realign, to bring awareness to this cognitive dissonance, to see the full picture, to know what the reality is that they are born into, sinking into, grounded into, so that they can move forward. It's about alignment, centering, being the best version of the person that we are, which means bringing as much light and working with these shadow elements and bringing them into the light.
Yeah, so just a few thoughts about plant spirit medicine and this sort of truth serum. It's sort of like, we said the cognitive dissonance is hidden in plain sight like water to the fish, and in a way, both through aromas and our other techniques, it's like all of a sudden the fish becomes aware of the water, and it's all, the information is all, or everything's already there, and so it's reminiscent, or it is actually the alchemical stage of separatio, where we've looked at things in a certain way, and then through the alchemical change in our psyche, all of a sudden the picture's changed. We realize that all the information is still there, but we have a totally different way of looking at it. So separatio is really, that's the gift of it. I'm thinking of in the book of Genesis, when Adam and Eve eat the fruit from the tree of knowledge, all of a sudden they're like, oh, we're naked. Well, they were always naked, but there's this other way of seeing it. So that's really the gift. One thing I want to say in that context is, one funny thing about the shadow is we can often see someone else's shadow really well. And I've learned over the years, I think we've both learned, you can't just call someone and say, well, did you know your shadow is this? It has to really come from within, from the unconscious. We can hold the space for someone. We can use these non-intellectual, non-cognitive ways, the oils, the plant spirit medicine, and really allow people that shift. It's also like an antidromia, things seemingly turning into their opposite. The same information is there, but we look at it in a different way. And then we actually, like we talked about in our class about the Necker cube, it's like you can see both ways. Instead of saying there's only one way of looking at it, we can see both ways, and there's some higher truth in the fact that we can see it in both ways that often seem paradoxical. That's really the gift of separatio. So again, you can't just say to someone, well, did you know your shadow is this? We hold the space. Once there's that glimpse there, we can help people put it in words, phrase it, but we can't say to them, oh, this is your shadow, because then the intellect's going to say, well, no, it isn't. So it's really about holding the space and allowing the wisdom of the psyche, of the unconscious, to emerge, and for us to, in holding the space, create a safe environment in which that new knowledge, which can often be really shocking, that it can safely emerge and integrate.
Yeah, the role that we have is, as Florian said, to hold the space and to really see. So we look and we see and we honor, and we can often see parts of the person that they're not aware of, and just by beholding them, that enables something to happen where the awareness expands. Also, I think it's important to mention that this doesn't happen intellectually. So with our consultations, with the plant spirit medicine, with the aromatics, the idea is that actually it's somatic. We're holding this information in our bodies, in our cells. So we access it. The doorway is through feeling, not thinking. And I think that's very important. And just getting back to the lady that we sat for, who is a midwife, when we sat for her, we realized, and she realized, we talked about it afterwards, that we're actually doing midwifery, but rather than birthing a baby, we're helping people birth themselves. It's midwifery of the soul. And I really like that that name for what we do, because midwives have to be very present. They're holding space, they're supporting, they're guiding, but they can't go and wrench the baby out or push on the belly for the baby to come out. Their patience and their willingness just to hold that space is what's important, and be there if needed. So I really like that name. We also call this work Aromatic Shamanism, because we're using aromas to work with the unconscious, to journey with. So that's us. I think we should go, because this has been 27 minutes, and if you're interested in our work and our videos, please subscribe to our channel. If you'd like to read more about what we do, we have a blog on AromaGnosis.com, and for the aromatics, we also have a blog on Cathy'sAttars.com. Both of those sites, we have an email that we send out. We're probably doing it every other week, one for AromaGnosis 1 week and one for Cathy's Attars the next, because we don't want to inundate you with our stuff. And we love you. We're here. Contact us by email as well if you've got anything you want to share or ask us. Lots of love.
Lots of love. See you soon.
Bye.